Well, good evening, everybody. This is The Body We Stand. If there are any audio problems, please tell me. A quick shout out to the early birds from The Body We Stand. We have Joey Fulcher. Joey, good to hear from you and see you. Veg from London, Ontario. Mooney Real, back with the group here. Good to see Mooney. And a few incognito. So it's good to see everybody. This is The Body We Stand. It is roughly 10 after 9 on Saturday night. It is July the 8th. Right. I want to thank you for showing up tonight. And if you're watching after the show, we thank you for watching. Dave and I ask that you join our Facebook page, which can be found by using a simple search for The Body We Stand Facebook group page. We all like to commiserate about the current political situation going on. it's kind of like a support group in a certain way, but in reality, it more or less serves as a way to share information and to help us cope with the situation and understand that the United States is under a threat of becoming an authoritarian country. So it's that important to us. We also have been doing this for around 3 years. David Price and I have been doing the Divided We Stand YouTube page. YouTube channel, which you're watching right now. We ask that you subscribe. We don't monetize anything. We just ask that you become a part of our group. The more, the merrier. So we really, really appreciate it. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my co-host and good friend, Dave Price. Dave, can you hear me? We good?
I can hear you, Brian.
Oh, good. I think we're going to get away with good sound tonight, hopefully. So, how are you doing, Dave? It's good to see you. I haven't talked to you for a while.
Yeah, well, doing well. With our shortened schedule, we pulled it down for the summer. People have more to do an hour. I may even beg off a little earlier tonight. I have to catch a 5 a.m. flight tomorrow. So,
wowzers!
Well, I don't have to catch a 5. I have to be there at 5. So for a 6 a.m. flight. So, if I won't fall asleep, but I don't know if I'll make the 10 o'clock witching hour. But let's get as much covered as we can in that time.
Right. So first of all, Dave, the show tonight I think could go in different directions, but I'd like to start from something that I've been watching. Some of you may be familiar with television show Black Mirror, which has been around since 2011. It's generally a British production, and many people would call it kind of like a spin-off of The Twilight Zone. And for those of you who haven't watched it, it's on Netflix. It's basically a series that has a dystopian view, in most cases, of technology. And as I've been watching these shows, and I've probably seen 2 seasons thus far, my wife and I, it's come about an angle that's made me really, really think. Not that I haven't thought about dystopian views, Dave, and all of you out there. As many of you know, David and I have complete agreements about guns and our feelings toward guns. And, there's the old saying that, well, guns don't kill, people do. And we understand that. But when we get into technology, AI, and things such as that, it can get much, much more nuanced. Because as an example, as I was telling Ronnie today, if it hadn't been for the cell phone, my car broke down a couple of weeks ago on a main highway, I would have been in big trouble. And in the past, you had to deal with it in your own way, and it was very, very time consuming. And there's a certain sense of security when you have the technology. On the other hand, we've seen what the social media platforms have done to penetrate the psyche of America politically. Nowadays, it's only a matter of minutes that you may be able to change the views of people or get people, too involved with things in politics that would not have happened 10, 20, just years ago. So Black Mirror is the type of show that looks at it from that angle. It is a dystopian view of technology in general, as I said. But I think it's important to look at because when you look at these episodes, and we'll probably talk a little bit about it, you look at this, it does, I think, make an important statement that Rod Serling himself was trying to make. He had to avoid the censors, talking about, for example, issues of race and such, by having these plots which weren't really identifiable as any one thing per se going on in society. You could kind of tell what he's talking about, but he worked around it. And I think this show does exactly that. And I think it's, as I said to Ronnie, I think it's kind of like the Twilight Zone on steroids. So first of all, Dave, have you seen any episodes of Black Mirror?
Yes, and I think you gave an accurate description of it. That critics are calling it a somewhat a Twilight Zone for the 21st century. And you also touched on something. I think what Black Mirror can do now is much more than what the Twilight Zone could do in its time. Dystopian literature, of course, it was dystopian literature before there was dystopian film and before there was dystopian TV, is nothing new. Reaches back to the Romantic writers and even before that, maybe back as far as some say, back as far as the Greeks, in terms of looking at things that exist now and maybe extrapolating some negative messages from that and moving it to the modern age. I was a huge fan of the Twilight Zone, and I also liked the other show, The Outer Limits, which did somewhat similar but never achieved the acclaim that the Twilight Zone did. In fact, when you talk about the 50 best TV shows of all time, you usually find the Twilight Zone in that group. So it was, it may well be the most significant, if you will, science fiction show of its time. Now, one of the things that dystopian literature or movies or TV does, it warns us. It looks at something and warns us. And I'm always reminded of the classic novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And basically, the monster was not the monster. In fact, it's never described as Frankenstein. It was Dr. Frankenstein. He was the monster. It was Frankenstein's monster. But through all that, while it was a physical being, it was actually a fear of science run amok. And that is very much with us today, and it's been throughout my lifetime and long before I was born. Growing up, by the time I hit my teenage years, there were really two science fiction books that rose to the top. One was 1984 by George Orwell, and the other is, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. And they take two different approaches, right? In 1984, you get a fascist, totalitarian view of the future, a dystopia of that type, political dystopia. One of the is just described. The government is described as a boot eternally smashing the face of the people forever. Brave New World was sort of like Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. It was just that they had a drug in their soma that everybody took, and they went to the feelies, which were motion pictures, and kind of gave up politics that way. Well, and we used to debate, somewhat jokingly, but somewhat seriously, once in a while in a college dorm, which version of the future was there. And then along comes a more recent book, which is also a huge TV success, A Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. And that really deals with theocracy and women as 42nd class citizens, not even second class citizens. And you've got, almost every, I shouldn't say that's it. I am going to say it. Almost every science fiction writer at some point brings up some form of either dystopian short story, dystopian novel, or dystopian feelings. And basically what it really is the warning that what you have with science and technology is a good thing, but like anything else, it's misused. You mentioned guns, and I was just I was always doing kind of I hate to say it, a lecture. I never lectured when I taught high school. I lectured in college, but not when I taught high school. But I would bring in three items: a toy gun, laptop computer, and the Bible, and ask, are these good things or bad things? And the answer is they're things. Things are neither good nor bad. Things are good and bad as how they are used. Do you have a show that hits you, or an episode, because it's episodic, an episode of Black Mirror that hits you pretty hard? Or
well, I've only seen two seasons. I don't know that any one of them has struck me as being any better than the other, because it does have that dystopian theme all the way through. I think the one that bothered me was the most, although, when you watch the first one, I believe that was with the, I think I have a list of them here, the names of it, the campaign trail.
Yeah.
That was the very first one, I believe, in 2011, the national anthem. Okay, where the Prime Minister of England is basically forced to have sex with a pig, or the princess dies, that type of thing. And I mean, well, let's just look at that one, okay? Because I think that's the beginning, and if anybody out there has not seen this, it's a good place to start. And what got me about that one was when they started showing the polls, like, immediately. And we see that, when you watch CNN, MSNBC, it doesn't matter in that case which one you watch. There's this constant interactive display. Tell us how you think about this. It's getting you to be interactive. Even YouTube channels, they're asking, please post something in the comments, blah, 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 and whatnot. In fact, even our show here is interactive because, I post the commentary, and we're not saying that's wrong, but within that particular episode, Dave, if you remember it, if you've seen it, the public opinion would tilt from moment to moment after each action. And it was almost in real time that you would see the actual change in view of the public, the national public, within hours. Their whole view of what he should or shouldn't do was right there. And this is, I think, where I'm drawing parallels to our society when watching the news, and I still believe the news is important, at least proper news, so to speak. But you see how quickly viewpoints change, and it's posted immediately. So it's almost as if you get too quick of a fix of something, where your brain is just so constantly stimulated. It's just like it's got to be the constant get off for politics, and people, again, they change their opinion at the whim of a question. And what happens? Well, he just says one sentence, how he handles the situation, and they have switched their opinion. And then, of course, he has to react to the opinion, and because of that opinion, there you go. And now I see what's happening with Trump. Well, and it's, in a certain sense, there's a certain genius. It's a cunning genius of Trump. How, again, he keeps going back to the media. He doesn't really care about, he does care about the courts. He doesn't want to serve any time in prison. He doesn't even want to be on the stand because he knows what's going to happen. But he wants to play the game the way this is played. And this is, again, there's a certain genius in it because, again, as I said in the intro, this type of thing, this pop culture through the media penetrates the human psyche, and it does it so quickly. And I say this truthfully, folks, because you may know that one of my majors was business, but I would say one of the most interesting courses that I took, if not the most interesting, was taking a popular culture course. And I thought it was even more profound than any marketing class that one could take. And I'm including 300 or 400 level marketing classes that I saw. Even then, I realized, the power of pop culture. Just look at somebody cry from watching a film. Or yourself, Dave, you yourself said this, and there's nothing wrong with this. You yourself said when you were, 18 or so, and you watched Easy Rider, and you saw the scene with the rednecks you just saw a lot of things they did. You were ready to kick some ass after that because you were so affected by it, because we are emotional beings. So I can see how Trump is doing this kind of thing, and I can see the power in preying upon the emotions. And Trump himself said in 2015, I love the uneducated. What he's really saying is, I love the people who watch TV and follow blindly. And there you go. That's how I look at it.
Well, I agree.
That it was episode.
As someone who comes out of the world of journalism, I spent 12 years there. And you might as well say I did it in the time of dinosaurs, even though I left the business in the mid 80s. It's changed so much. And again, technology is part of that. So technology affects the news in what makes news, but it also, of course, affects how news is delivered. And that means a lot. I just read a book, highly recommend the author, Thomas Mallon. He's DC boy. if you will. And he writes like it's hard to say what he does. He writes, I guess, in one of the genres he writes in is historical fiction. He had a book on Watergate where he used real, the real Watergate characters, if you will, but put words in their mouth and used, so it becomes a greater truth maybe than any truth we have, right? And he did one on Truman defeats Dewey, and the thing that struck me, I just finished that, I guess, a few days ago, was the candidates were campaigning by train, number one, going to whistle stops, and they would get a notice in the local newspaper, right? And these are presidential candidates. And of course, there would be some national correspondents going on the train with them. But it was, a slow delivery of news. And the thing also that struck me was in the book, it featured a small city, small town, with a big city nearby, Chicago. And to hear the candidates, you could hear them on the radio. So you could hear them. But TV, remember, 1940s, just coming into being, just surfacing. And some of the characters actually went to Chicago because it was a big city and they could actually see TV. Today, there's not a place in America that you don't have television access, internet access. I mean, yeah, there might be some dead zones, but, in general, and you said it, Brian, I think maybe we're not even capable of processing all the news that hits us right away. A big topic, we may discuss it a little bit tonight. I'm not really knowledgeable enough to be very articulate on it, but is artificial intelligence, right? AI. Mm-hmm. They're already, it's certainly in the vocabulary of America right now, what it means. A friend was here. We haven't seen her for a couple of years. She moved to Atlanta, and she's heavily involved in the technology business. And she was talking about using chatbot to actually write novels. And she does a lot of manual work. What I mean by that is designing and writing for manuals, work manuals. And she said that occupation won't be there in a few years. It'll just be done with artificial intelligence. And of course, take it to its furthest extreme, I guess with AI, you end up with the Terminator, sort of. Mm-hmm. That idea of, or you're right back around. The interesting, you're right back around with Frankenstein's monster, right? You've really just come back around. These things that are reflected in Black Mirror or The Twilight Zone or any such shows, they're a projection of what will happen. Those that deal with the future. Some of them, of course, go backwards and deal with the past and show you that. But one of my dealing with the future, they take something that's happening now and then filter in in a direction that's negative, and therefore you get, and at the end you get the dystopia. My favorite, I don't know, it's hard to pick a favorite Twilight Zone, but one that always struck me is the monsters are due on Maple Street. Does that mean anything to you, Brian? I mean, it might not, just the title. Do you know it by title?
I don't know. Is that the one where the guy goes in the train back to this town? Or?
No, that's Willoughby.
That's right.
In Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, you're led to see or believe that the Earth is under attack by something, right? But the neighbors start destroying each other. And at the end, these two Martian creatures, they say, all we had to do was let them go at it themselves. The idea that our destruction is there. Another one that was great, Invaders. Agnes Moorehead, who just...
that one. Okay, I think I do remember that one.
Yeah, and what happens is, so you hone in, and for some reason, I mean, it was made to be that way, but for some reason, when I looked at it the first time, I was in West Virginia. It was a West Virginia cabin. That's what it appeared to me. Isolated, and this woman is fighting these tiny little...
I remember that one now, yeah.
Monsters. And at the end, you hear this, something like, U.S. ship 27 to base, US, we're under attack. And the whole thing was the aliens that you were rooting against were your own Americans, were people of your era. So again, this idea of social media being able to determine, I guess, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. Uh, and another problem is with social media, I think, is that it's become very pigeonholed. Um, I mean, I'm guilty of that too. I mean, during Trump years, I think I counted once. I might be off. I either bounced or was bounced by, I think, 64 Facebook friends. And I don't feel any loss from that. Um, and they don't feel any loss, except we'd never be able to persuade or dissuade each other again from our political beliefs. And one last comment overriding all of this, whether you're talking about newspapers, you're talking about radio, you're talking about social media, however we get the news, they're all run as businesses. I think a lot of times people forget that, or they don't think about that. It's to make money. Okay. It's to make money. Don't make no bones about it. Sometimes it can be a quality newspaper like the Washington Post or New York Times. Sometimes it can be like the New York Daily News, not such a reputable, or the New York Post, maybe not such a reputable paper, and they gear for their audience. So when Fox says Fox News, it's gearing for a Fox News audience. And I can honestly say with MSNBC, I mean, they certainly have a slant.
Right, but there's a difference between a Fox viewer and an MSNBC viewer, okay? Because I'm one of them, okay?
Right.
I mean, I understand that, they're following a certain event, but if you look at a Lawrence O'Donnell program or somebody who's watching that compared to somebody watching, let's say, Jeanine Pirro, is it Jean Pirro or Jeanine Pirro? Jeanine Pirro, I believe it. Or even Maria Bartiromo, there's definitely a difference in the viewer. And again, if you can take out of that the fact that they are there to make money, that's been going on all the time. But again, you do have individuals who are still working there, and they have to have their individual views about what they are going to do and what they're not going to do. And I've said this before, even people like Rachel Maddow, they don't need to stay there. They can leave. If they have their ideals and their personal dignity, they don't have to be controlled by the media, because just the very fact that they're being decent, then if people come to them for the money, well, that's at least more acceptable to me. Okay, I'm not trying to glorify Rachel Maddow, but there's a and maybe I'm the one who's being bamboozled, but there's a definite difference when I watch Lawrence O'Donnell and how they present the evidence. It's almost like watching a courtroom. Okay, now, again, it's that attorney's point of view, but I see a great difference, and because I see one side is kind of like a Trump thing, okay, where they're just it's trying to prey at the emotion, and it's the oldest. That's what it is. News outlets like Fox use the oldest trick in the book, which is look over there, or the what about, and that's the way they go about it. So while I agree with you, Dave, that yes, every one of those organizations, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, they are money-making organizations, and they are going to cater to their market, that really, I think, comes after the fact in a certain sense. I think that just like with Trump and other politicians, again, you look at the Republican Party from 50 years ago or 40 or even 30 years ago, there was a certain sense of decency. I mean, during Watergate, they were able to take care of Nixon. And it was, but to me, now I'm looking backwards, I'm thinking maybe the Republican Party as it was a buffer to protect us from the constituents, the Trump types that were always kind of there. They were kind of like what you saw in Easy Rider in that restaurant. And they were able to put a better candidate than what that person, if you look at Easy Rider, that's the type would have voted for Trump. And see, that's the danger. Now the cat's out of the bag, and that line between the constituent and his or her politician has become blurred. Especially when you see some of these faces like Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they are kind of like the people who are sitting in that restaurant to me. So I guess what I'm in a circuitous way, what I'm saying is, yes, I know that all of them are there to make money. You have to make money. I have to make money. But there are levels of integrity. I think that comes first. And if you look at it, I think there are people who do have enough integrity that comes first, especially when it comes to important decisions. I mean, I don't think Alito has integrity. But I would say that there are some who have had that integrity, but now you have, as we mentioned last week, it's become a cult. You've got a kangaroo court in many cases. So again, in a circuitous way, I think that something has changed, and I'm not so sure that going back to the Black Mirror, or just the idea of media and pop culture, that penetration is so quick and so powerful that these crazy ideas have become mainstream. And I can't see it getting back. I see, again, I use this analogy. We are like in 1941, not knowing whether Hitler would lose or not. So, the money is an issue, but that doesn't mean that they don't have any morals. It doesn't mean that, Rachel, and I'm sure you agree with me. I mean, it doesn't mean that Rachel Maddow doesn't have morals or whatever, like they're just doing it for the money. I don't think it's as simple as that.
No. And again, I make it clear, my station of choice, if I watched broadcast news or cable news, which I do not, would be MSNBC. I don't think there's any question about that. Actually, when I worked at the museum, a number of us felt that the two most accurate representations of American culture, not so much culture, but American politics, American interests, was the BBC, outsider's eyes looking in, more than any necessarily national ties. And the other, believe it or not, was Al Jazeera, which did have its, radical Islamic broadcast. But in Al Jazeera America, it was pretty level-handed.
They're worse than level, right? I understand that, right? But
I think, again, when you talk about the media, and we're talking about that quite a bit tonight, it really, as far as reporting is concerned, now remember, I've said this before, but I really think it's important to break it down into the three areas that are three types of stories, whether it's TV, radio, or print. First of all, are news stories, right? And news stories are just that, stories about the news, supposing to be as objective and fair as possible, right? That's what we're supposed to see. Then you have commentary, which is just one person's opinion, based maybe writing about something loosely in the news, but having they may even quote other people, but basically it's their viewpoint. And then you have editorials, and editorials are the voice of the organization itself. And I think a lot of times, and again, I happen to know the business because I worked in it, but a lot of people have not been journalists or been around journalists or worked in journalism, and they don't really get the distinction between the three. You shouldn't say that a commentary is a news story, because it's not. Certainly, and even if you say a news story is objective, even that's questionable, because you have to make some decisions as a writer or a broadcaster, what you're going to lead with. Whatever comes first, people remember. So if you're going to say, on the show Divided We Stand, Brian Weinstein is, and then and then Dave Price is, well, already Brian got you got
right.
top billing. So I mean, there's all these little nuances, but basically, at one point, the idea was news. Now, normally you think of quantity in terms of something as being relatively a good thing. Having, of course, quality is important too. But again, going back to my beginnings of politics, which was kind of my junior year, so in 1968, 3 channels In the
Right.
Philly area, it was 3, 6, and 10. ABC, NBC, and CBS. And quite honestly, as far as the news was concerned, CBS far and away with Walter Cronkite. NBC picked up some because people liked Huntley, and David Brinkley, and ABC just was a nowhere. It was a nowhere. They were the new boy on the block, if you will. They weren't getting any traction, real traction. And but ABC, we can blame somewhat for the modern state of televised news, because they needed some way to make a name for themselves. And so they got together two gentlemen, brilliant gentlemen, very opposite sides of politics, Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley. And at a national convention, they had them comment and had commentary, and they just really went at it. That's the famous one where actually Buckley finally said, shut up, you queer.
Right.
I know, but Buckley was unflappable. Whether you agreed with Buckley or not, and I didn't, there was a sense that he was educated. There was a sense that he was erudite. There was a sense that, and he just say, I remember, his tongue, kind of stick it out. It was almost like a serpent.
It was great that you remember, like he was talking about neo-fascism, and then Vidal came back saying, "Well, the only neo-fascist I can think of is you." It got personal.
and it did, and that's really, if you go back from that moment, that's if you had to pick one moment in time, it would be that convention, Buckley and Vidal, this idea of confrontational news, right? Then remember Crossfire on CNN?
Absolutely, I used to watch Crossfire,
and that was kind of the extension, right? So now you've got these two back, but now we've moved to the point where there aren't any crossfires. So you've lost the Buckleys and Vidals, right, for the most part, especially on the Republican side or the conservative side. No William F. Buckley out there. Maybe the most, I don't know, the reasoned voice is George Will, who does some TV but more writing. So when you no longer have, what I'm trying to say here, it was there were checks and balances, and it's always good to have checks and balances. Now we think most of that with government, right, with the Supreme Court, Congress, and the White House, executive branch, but there were some checks and balances with the fairness doctrine on broadcast media. In other words, if you presented A, and A is the opposite of B, B had to have fair. Now they don't have that. And whether they would be sitting in that restaurant or riding in that truck, Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene certainly do represent the type of character that was portrayed so long ago in Easy Rider. And I think a lot about, that was my most formative time. 64, Beatles come out, to 73, I graduate college, get married, and have a child. That was my growing period there. And that was as tumultuous as it is today, almost in some ways. You had the Vietnam War, you had culture classes. But you said before with Watergate, there was always something there that could kind of stop the bad guys, if you will, from, shall we say, just carrying the day. And you just don't have that today. To my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, you said 3 years, I don't know how many shows, 100 plus, more than 100 shows that we've done. And one time we've had a conservative on who somehow stumbled onto it, if you remember. And he and I had a dialogue going back and forth with him posting and me commenting on it. So, you say it most every show, and it's true. This is a group of like people who see kind of the way we're going is not the best way to go, necessarily. An America that, I don't want to say, some people say, I don't recognize it. Of course I recognize it. It's the same thing. It's just this time, because my feeling is because of social media and the stakes, if you will, it's even higher. And that's what I want to talk about, just a couple things here. We talk about the stakes and where news media picks it up. I said, first of all, the news media is limited by the organizations out there. And I talked a little bit about this last week, but I want to follow this group, so I'll be talking about it quite a bit over between now and the election. and it's a group called Moms for Liberty. Who can be against moms? Who can be against liberty? Well, and last week you said, Brian, sounds like. Well, it is. It is just exactly what it sounds like, which is it's really Moms for Liberty for us, but not for anyone
Not
else.
you, right?
Yeah, for me, but not you. So, what is Moms for Liberty? It's a growing group, and it's in its infancy. It's less than a year old, and already it has 120,000 members in 44 states with 285 chapters. Okay. Now, in a nation with millions, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's going to be a very influential group. It just had a national meeting in Philadelphia, which its organizer described as, and I quote, the most important conference to happen in Philadelphia since 1776. I think that's kind of hyperbole there, kid. But, and environmental corporate, yeah, Moms for Liberty are horrible people. And that's why I kind of want to put them on the radar, I think. And so what happens is this group is clearly conservative. No, it's radical right, beyond radical right. And it fights two things, really. It fights diversity and it fights inclusion. Wow. Okay. And basically what they're saying is parents should have the right to dictate what is taught in school, but more importantly, what isn't taught in school, right? And not just taught, but available in access. They've targeted libraries, school libraries. They've targeted teachers. There's already teachers, a number of teachers across the country who have been fired. Even a couple of administrators, I think it was Kentucky, went in and read a book that indicated some favorite or some support for gay lifestyle. He was fired. So Moms for Liberty, they really do want to control what is taught, and they want to control. Brian, you're still in teaching. I'm out of it. They want to control what you teach, what you can teach, and right. Tell you what you can't. Now, if that's all there was, that's fine. But already at this conference, 5 of the declared candidates for the Republican presidential nomination appeared before their group. I think it was a 3-day. Usually, I'm pretty sure it was a 3-day conference. So at some point. And a couple of them were minor, Asa Hutchinson and the guy whose name I can't even pronounce, running my Wagwee, whatever he is. But 3 were pretty significant. And they each had something kind of interesting to say about appealing for this group to get its endorsement. Now, so far, the group is new, and they haven't endorsed any. They've endorsed locally, and they've endorsed statewide. They haven't endorsed a national candidate, but there hasn't been a national election, right?
Right.
So it formed after the last election, and so I'm sure they will endorse in 2024. I'm sure whether they'll endorse in the primary, in the Republican primary or not, I don't know. But I know that I'm sure they'll endorse in the presidential campaign. So let's look first at probably the one who has the least chance of winning the presidency, but is definitely a vice presidential candidate. I think that'd be Nikki Haley. And this is what Nikki Haley has to say about this group, that the Southern Poverty Law Center has declared an extremist group devoted to spreading messages of anti-inclusion and hate throughout the country. So they've been identified as this group. And she says about this group, she appears before them, and she says, I want to get this right, quote, so let me look down here for a minute. When they mentioned this was a terrorist organization, I said, well, count me a Mom for Liberty. Look at that for a moment. Think about that for a moment. A person running for president of the United States says, okay, if this is a terrorist organization, count me in. Really? Really? And then, of course, Mr. DeSantis is there. And Mr. DeSantis says that I am here because I'm committed to rooting out so-called social emotional learning. If I had to say where America is really falling down, it's in its social IQ and its emotional IQ, and its intellectual IQ. But the idea of really to be opposed to that, that's what you're going to run on. And he has the record right now, of course, as the I think worst, if you want to look at it, on LGBTQ rights. As he calls himself an anti-woke warrior, whatever. And then here comes my favorite, of course, who I think it's interesting. You would always save your best to last, right? And he was the closing speaker. Donald J. Trump comes up. And of course, Donald J. Trump can be everything to every people, right? To any person or any individual group. And he says, just quote, "You're the best thing." Wait a minute. You say you're the best. No, Donald, stop it. Stop it. They're not the best thing. But we know that. But this group, Moms for Liberty, we'll talk about them, I think, over and over again, because I think, especially when you're talking about dystopian, they certainly, if they were to come into power, definitely America would be a dystopia. Yeah, sounds like Mothers of the Confederacy to me. Very much so. But it's interesting, Brian, too, though. But they take this point. Well, how can you be against moms? How can you be against liberty? And how can you be against kids? Well, my argument to them is, how can you be for guns and for kids? How does that work? How does that work? That doesn't work. But they see it that way. And then, so you have groups like Moms for Liberty that can dominate the news and take off. And then you've got individual politicians there. And a guy who's been quiet for a while. I don't know if you saw. Did you see that Mr. Josh Hawley is back in the news? Did you see that this week?
I didn't see that, but you're right. He has been quiet now that I think of it.
He's been quiet. Which again, and so is Ted Cruz to a certain extent.
Right.
I have no idea why, but Hawley has really been quiet. But he, of course, with July 4th, he can't miss an invitation. And on July 4th, he tweets, a tweet claiming the United States was founded, quote, "on the gospel of Jesus Christ." Okay, what's wrong with that? It's false. But he takes a step further and attributes to Patrick Henry, and Patrick Henry never said that. Holly, so you've got this thing circulating, and of course he was appealing to a group that we should all be afraid of, just like for Moms for Liberty, the idea of any group that supports Christian nationalism. That is not the case. I sometimes, Brian, I'm going to let you take over here. I lose it. Where did we lose this idea of separation of church and state? I mean, we really did. Now that we've lost, maybe we never really had it. But I mean, I kind of grew up. That was kind of the thing. Separation of church and state. Got prayer out of the schools. It got 10 Commandments out of the schools. It got some other things that were good, saying, no, you can do that in your church. So of all those things that I mentioned, or the things we talked about today, which one frightens you or bothers you the most, Brian?
Well, first of all, the very fact that the very big issues that we should be thinking about right now, such as climate change, war in Russia, or war in Ukraine, I should say, the fact that they are coming up with some side issues. First of all, the abortion thing should not have been even an issue, and that came up. Now, the issue has been, with books, and now they're going against the teachers, so they're going to get into the school boards. I don't know, Dave, that there's any one issue that's more important to that, because we know some people say, well, it's gun control, because we see just people dying. It's frightening. It's changing the way that, we go out to malls, how we purchase items. I just think in general, my biggest problem right now would be the court systems, and just in general, what Trump did, he was able to infiltrate the system so much so that the idea that somehow Jesus was part of the Constitution, or that somehow, we can put God in the curriculum in some way. They've made it a truth, and again, it's very circuitous here again, but it goes back to the idea of they've penetrated the minds of the uneducated. And basically we're talking about people getting very emotional, and you can turn them around very, very quickly. And almost like how you were educated, but you were affected by that movie at that moment in time. But this is happening every day to them, and it keeps getting pounded in, whether it's from Jeanine Pirro, Tucker Carlson, whatever, any one of these, Trump for that matter. So, Dave, I can't really say one thing is more important than the other. I would say, if I had to say, the most important thing has been the change in the Supreme Court. Yeah. And I don't know how you get around it, because the issues won't even matter, the issue, if you've got that 6-3 and you have got a kangaroo court. It all won't matter if the judge is corrupt. As Lenny Bruce would say, there is no corrupt. Mm. And like I say, you and I are, we're in our last third of our lives. I don't see how we're going to see the resolution. We're not getting to that end zone that, we always wanted. We always knew, okay, well, eventually we'll be able to get through the Nixon era. We'll get through Kennedy's death. All these kind of things that you get through. Well, now we're not getting through, and again, it relates to and again, it is dystopian, and it is Black Mirror-ish, and as I believe it was Mooney who said, or somebody said, this program is more like reality than most, and I see this happening now, Dave. I don't know that you get around the technology unless you can play war games with technology. That you're going to have to come up with the perfect sentence or the perfect meme. Otherwise,
But the scary thing is, if there's no distinction, and there really isn't a distinction between something written by a human and something produced by AI right now on chatbot. There really isn't. You have to. Let me take that back. You need someone to oversee maybe one or two slips of grammar. Theoretically, though, right? A machine, AI intelligence, is going to spell. Freudian slip. Spell much better than almost anyone else, right? Won't have to say, I think I know how to spell this. I'll just put it in there. It won't mispronounce. I remember having a discussion with somebody the other day about, I don't even know how it came up. Somehow it came up to Civil War. And I said I was a Civil War buff when I was a kid, but I did most of it by reading, right? And I really thought Grant took Lee's sword, the surrender of the South, was at Appomattox Courthouse. Well, a couple of years after, it's Appomattox, because, it pronounces. So that's a human mistake that I made that a machine probably would not make, because it would know. It would know. Another thing that frightens me about this wave of technology is, as I say, is the influence that it can hold. But it's the fact, Brian, that I don't know. I imagine if you had to look for any organization in America that is, as an organization, is least technology adept, it might be the U.S. Senate. So many of them, they don't make their tweets. Now the younger ones do. I mean, Holly knows and Cruz knows, and then and then the last point, because I see it's getting time for me to bow out, that I want to make is we've got a new player, the social media thing on the scene, and that's called Threads. You aware of that at all?
I joined it a couple of days ago, simply as a protest against Elon Musk.
What are you protesting Mr. Musk for?
Well, I don't want him to tell me that somebody else's voice is more important than mine. And he's basically giving me an FU.
Think about that. See, that's another problem. So you've got Elon Musk controlling Twitter. which is hard. It's hard. Okay, I mean, the guy has money and that's it. He has nothing else. No soul, I don't think. Certainly no integrity. So people see an opening, and a couple of people have taken, have looked at actually doing something about it. Donald Trump has his own platform now, right?
True Social, right?
True Social. There's a name for you, right? Like Moms for Liberty. Yeah, you're gonna get truth out of Donald Trump. That's going to happen. And that really didn't take off the way he hoped. It was a horrible rollout. I remember I looked at the first day, it crashed. It was, and when's the last time you've seen, the only time you ever see that, Trump said on Truth Social, I mean, nobody else is using it, or not the numbers that you need. But now, seeing an opening with Musk bleeding, if you will, along comes Mark Zuckerberg, Mr. Facebook, and now Facebook will control, Zuckerberg will control Facebook, will control Instagram, and will control Threads. Now, at this point, subject to change, Threads you join through Instagram is the way, and you can link up all your friends. So all of a sudden now, Threads isn't there yet, but it had some impressive sign-up numbers. But it might even be the top 20. So we'll say 3 of the top 20 ways that people interact on social media, one man controls. Not a good thing, especially. It's just not a good thing. So whether hopefully we won't find ourselves, as I mentioned, the invasion one from Twilight Zone. Hopefully we won't find ourselves being crushed by huge powers greater than us. But I think there's a lot of danger out there. And with that, Brian, on this downbeat show, but I'm gonna, but I don't want to say downbeat. There's also, I can say this, there's dignity in the fight.
Yes.
There's dignity in the fight.
Well said.
And all of us have to, we may not win it, or we may win it. Who knows? I mean, like you said, you're right, we won't know. But I still think the one thing you can't is quit. Remember, a lot of things relate to sports, but remember Jimmy Valvano?
Yes.
Coach for North Carolina State. Really outgoing. Really, I mean, I just always thought he was really a cool guy. And of course, then he develops cancer. And they say, don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. And and eventually cancer took his life. But I think we all have to kind of adopt that Jimmy V attitude that we just don't give up. We just don't give up. Some days we get really tired. Maybe we don't do as much, but we don't give up. And with that, Brian, I'm going to go get some shut-eye. And thank you, everyone, for watching. If you're watching it live, thank you. If you're watching it on tape, thank you. And one last thing about this. A lot of people invite their friends to join. I know this is an extra step, but it's worth it. If you're going to invite someone, just send a separate message, not a group message, or remind them to make sure to fill out that brief questionnaire.
Right.
I think. Well, I'm pretty sure, Brian, we're over 1,000 people. We haven't.
Oh yeah, I mean, sure. We have cut out a lot of people simply because they would not reply to the affirmative. There are certain rules we have, and it's okay if you don't like the rules, but you can't be in the group. You know what I mean?
And that's just simple. It's a simple way of making sure that at least there's some record where you said we will abide by this.
Right. And by the way, just so I can note before you go, Dave, is there was a time the first week or two where we didn't have those rules. Mm-hmm. And we were accepting everybody, but then within a day or two, people were going at it, and everything that we were trying to do, this commiseration, this information, it was not working out. We had chaos, and it was actually the members who would send us personal messages until Dave said, "You got to listen to this guy. You just got to listen to this guy." And I listened to Scott Sayre, and said, "I'm wrong. He's right. Scott's right. I've got to somehow put a wall between those who are just going to start trashing certain people in the party. You can't do that at this moment because we're trying to be a pragmatic group. And it's not like we're trying to limit free speech. It's just that we're trying to have a coherent process of being able to get this information with people who generally are within the same team here. And that was the only way it could be done. And he was right, you were right, and I'm glad that I I listened to you and to Scott, because if it hadn't been for that, this is again, as we end up here, this is what happened to the reality report. It just, 18 different opinions, and it became a beast, and I couldn't. It was my baby, so to speak, and I said, no, I can't be a part of this. And to this day, I'm not a part of that, because it got out of control, and that was my fault. So
well, everyone, until next week, keep the faith. And as my daddy used to say, we'll be back, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise.
Thank you, Dave. And that's where we'll end it. We'll see everybody next week. Knock wood. Have a great week, and thanks for watching. Dave, I'm going to sign off, and there we go. Good night, everybody. I think.